Hello, good morning everyone. Today we are going to start and understand very thoroughly the cardiac cycle. So firstly, what is a cardiac cycle? So cardiac cycle. What does the term cardiac cycle mean? Cardiac cycle, it means it is the heart beat events. Okay. Heartbeat means heartbeat of a heart means heart beat means one systole and one diastole, which is the electric event as we studied in the previous classes. Electric event. And as a result of the systole and diastole, like it is like the electric event followed by the mechanical event, right? So here itself I am writing electric event followed by the mechanical event. Okay. Now, when this electric event is followed by the mechanical event, that is systole and diastole, in simple term, we can also write as systole is the contraction of heart. Okay, when the heart is contracting, pumping the blood, pumping the blood to the periphery and pulmonary circulation. Okay, that is to the lungs. Whereas diastole means filling of the heart by the blood. Now, before going into the events of the cardiac cycle, what we have to remember? We have to, I'm just keeping the chat box open in case you have any doubt, you can always ask. So, what does what are the parts, what are the structures that is comprised in a heart? The heart has 4 chambers. These are the anatomical chambers that we know. 2 upper chambers are the atria, right? And 2 lower chambers are the ventricles. Okay, so the heart is, like, as we all know, I'm just drawing a very simplified diagram for our understanding. So this is our heart. The upper chambers, these 2 are the right atrium and left atrium, and the lower is the right ventricle and left ventricle, right? Now, these 2 chambers, which are the atria, they act as reservoir, means they hold the blood. They receive the blood from the peripheral circulation through venous return and from the pulmonary circulation. Okay, and this two lower chamber, which are the ventricles, act as pumps. Okay, these are the ventricles are the one which is contracting and pumping blood to the circulation, to the systemic circulation as well as to the pulmonary circulation. So, in context to the in context to the contraction and relaxation of the chambers, like all chambers meaning the atria and the ventricles, both. Okay, the atria and the ventricles. In context to the contraction and relaxation of these chambers, the events that happen in or per beating, like every time the heart contracts and relaxes, it makes one beat. So every time in one beat and per one beating of heart, we study as cardiac cycle. This is our cardiac cycle. So all the events that is happening when this atria and ventricle are pumping are the cardiac cycle. Okay. Now, one cardiac cycle, the duration, the time, the duration of one cardiac cycle is 0.8 second. It's almost near about 0.8 second. This is how long a cardiac cycle is. Here, atria shows systole and diastole. The ventricles also shows systole and diastole. Now, atria, it spends about 0.1 second in the atria, whereas most of the time, maximum of the time, the atria remains in the diastolic phase, remains in the diastolic phase. Whereas when it comes to the ventricles, the ventricle, the systole is about 0.3 second, whereas the diastole is 0.5 second. Okay, this is the duration that the atria and ventricle spends in the contraction and relaxation phase. Now, coming to the events. What are the events? And how long actually each event take to make up that 0.8 second. So, events. Okay. To start with, we start with the diastole. Why diastole? Because diastole is the filling phase of the heart, means the ventricle gets filled with blood, and filling phase of the ventricle with the blood is very important, because until and unless the chambers of the heart, that are the ventricles, are filled with enough amount of blood, there is no way that it can pump adequate amount of blood to the periphery. So the phases of the diastole are protodiastole. In protodiastole, the ventricle actually spends about 0.04 second. Okay. After that, it goes to the isovolumetric relaxation. In the isovolumetric relaxation of the diastolic phase, the heart spends about 0.06 second. Okay. After the diastole, now once there is relaxation of the ventricle, what happens is that the event that starts is the filling of the ventricle by the blood. Now the filling is also not like constant. It's not that the filling is happening at the same rate, at the same speed. At first, there is like first fast or rapid filling of the ventricles. Okay. So here the heart, the ventricles of the heart spends about 0.1 second, about 0.1 second. Then comes the slow filling. Now the slow filling of the heart we also call as the diastasis. Slow filling phase, which is longer than the rapid filling, and it lasts about 0.2 seconds. Then at last there is again another filling phase, which is the last rapid filling phase. Now this is also 0.1 second. Okay. So if you count here, you see it's like 0.4 plus 0.1, about 0.5 second in the diastole. The total time that the ventricle spend in the diastole is 0.5 second, and this is the breakup. Okay. Now, what are the important events that happens? We will come to the important events along with the cardiac cycle in details. Now here, one thing that we have to remember is that with the start of the isovolumetric relaxation, what happened? Here the semilunar valves close. Okay, here the semilunar valve close. This is the important event that is happening in the diastolic phase of the ventricle. Coming to the systolic phase of the ventricle. So, systole. The events again that is happening in the systole. Systole, what do we know? How long is it? It is about 0.3 second, right? It starts with the isovolumetric contraction of the heart. Now, in this isovolumetric contraction of the heart actually spends about, the ventricles of the heart spends about 0.05 second. That's all it spends, which is followed by the ejection phase. Ejection also, just like the filling phase, is not like at a one go, not a one go phase. Okay. Then follows the rapid ejection phase. The rapid ejection phase is about 0.1 second. After the rapid ejection, slow ejection phase. Now, this slow ejection phase, this is little longer than the rapid one, which is about 0.15 seconds. So, you calculated 0.05, 0.152, and here 0.1 second. So, altogether 0.3 second. Okay, these are the main phases in the ventricular systole and diastole. Now you may be wondering why we are so much like fascinated about the ventricle and we have not mentioned such steps for the atria. See, in the beginning, if you remember, what have we understood? We have understood that atria, it actually acts as a reservoir, like a vessel that holds. Okay. Now, you also know the fact that there are there are this valves, tricuspid valve on the right side and the dicuspid or the mitral valve on the left side. So atria is never a completely sealed chamber. Okay, yes, the valves kind of anchors them airtight, but it is not a sealed chamber like that of the ventricle because it acts as a passage. Blood has to flow from the atrium to the ventricle. Okay, so there are not much phases in the systole and diastole because atrium is receiving the blood, the right side is receiving through the superior and the inferior vena cava from the systemic circulation, and the left atrium is the receiving the oxygenated blood via the pulmonary veins from the lungs. So it is receiving and then passing into the ventricle. That's why there are no demarcation in the systole and diastolic phase in the atria. What is important is to study the pressure change in the atria, just like how we will do with the ventricle, that obviously we will understand with the Wiggers diagram. So till now the phases are clear. Now important event that happens in the isovolumetric contraction is that AV valves close. At the beginning of this phase, there is like closure of the AV valves. Now the whole thing, just for our better remembrance, if we study in form of a pie chart, this is just for you guys to remember, it is something like this. Okay, a pie chart form depicting the different stages of the cardiac cycle, just showing the different like stages in the ventricular systole and diastole. So here you see it starts with the ventricle relaxing, which is the diastolic phase. So first we have the protodiastole as we studied, which is like 0.4 second. Then is isovolumetric relaxation designated as IVR, and the important event as we mentioned in the writing itself. What is important event? Here the semilunar valve closes. Okay, and then follows the rapid filling phase. Starts with the opening of the AV valve. Now all this thing we will study in details. Now then starts the fast filling and the diastasis, which is also the slow filling. Okay. Now, then is the last filling phase. I'm coming to the importance of the three stages right now. After the diastolic phase, the filling phase is over, what kickstarts? It kickstarts with the isovolumetric contraction, which is the step just before the ejection. So, isovolumetric contraction, it is about 0.05 second, and it starts with the closure of the AV valve, and opening of the semilunar valve. Then follows the rapid ejection, which lasts for 0.1 second, and slow ejection for 0.15 second. Okay. Other important point that we must remember is that ventricle, these are important points to be noted. Ventricles gets filled by both active and passive process. Okay, this is the liner. This is the liner that we are remembering now, and in the course of understanding each and every step, we will understand what we mean by this one. Now, let's start understanding the different phase one by one. So, to start with ventricular diastole. So, very quickly, we write the ventricular first step, protodiastole. Okay. First characteristic, 0.04 second. Here what happens, what actually happens in this protodiastole? Here, the blood injection through the aorta still happens at slowest rate. So protodiastole, as we have seen, this is like protodiastole. So protodiastole means just before the proper diastole, that is before the filling of the ventricle. So diastole has happened when? Diastole has happened just after the systole, that is after the contraction of the ventricle. So ventricles were contracting, and from the left ventricle via the aorta, from the left ventricle via the aorta, if we draw this one, so we'll also see the picture from the, this is your right and this is your left. So from the left ventricle via the aorta, there are blood that is going out. There was like ejection of blood. So in protodiastole, what happens? There is still little bit of blood that is going out, because the aorta is never without blood. No blood vessel can stay totally without any blood. There can never be like zero blood is there in the blood vessel. So this little bit of blood actually causes the squeezing of the aorta. Okay. So this is the protodiastole. Now at the end of the protodiastole, another event that happens which marks the beginning of the next one, which is the closure of the semilunar valves. Okay, so there is this semilunar valve. This is the aortic valve. This is the aortic valve. So just after the protodiastole, before the beginning of the isovolumetric relaxation, the closure of the semilunar valve occurs. And this is our second heartbeat. Right? This is a point to remember. This closure of this aortic valve, it causes the characteristic sound, which is the second heartbeat. Now, don't think that it's only the aortic valve that closes. On the right side, the pulmonary, from the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery that carries the blood to the pulmonary circulation, here also that also closes. Here also pulmonary valve closes. But why we are mentioning about the aortic valve? We are mentioning about the aortic valve because when we talk about this cardiac cycle and the heart function, we mainly talk about the left ventricle, because left ventricle is doing the greater work in pumping the blood to the periphery. So these are the steps of the protodiastole. Now comes the second stage. The second stage is the isovolumetric relaxation. So first characteristics we already know. The duration is about 0.06 second. The isovolumetric relaxation is about 0.06 second. So what happens here? At the beginning of this isovolumetric relaxation, we have seen the semilunar valves are closed, and it so happens that previously we will study here the AV the AV valves were also closed. So here you see, talking about the left ventricle, here we have our aortic valve also closed, and we have our semilunar valves also closed. We have our AV valve also closed. Now this ventricle, it becomes a closed chamber. So here what happens, the ventricle, it starts relaxing. It starts to relax. It starts to relax. So initially there is relaxation of the ventricles without any change in the volume. Okay, without any change in the volume. Another characteristic is that when the ventricles are relaxing, the blood, amount of the blood that is remaining in the ventricle is very less, because most of it has been pumped out to the periphery. So when the ventricles are relaxing, the blood is also less, and the ventricles are relaxing, no change in the volume also. The pressure in the ventricles are very low. So now you see, the ventricle is having very low pressure, but when this is happening, atria is getting filled by blood, as a result of which there is a difference in the pressure. So a big pressure gradient is created between the atria and ventricle. Okay, these are the events that is happening. Coming to the next event, that is the rapid filling phase. Now the rapid filling phase, this is quite fast. It is 0.1 second. Okay. Now this is very interesting. Now we have seen that during the isovolumetric relaxation, the ventricle is relaxing as a closed chamber, So when the ventricles were relaxing as a closed chamber, the ventricles are relaxing, right? There was filling of the atria. Okay, there was constant filling of the atria. Blood was coming to the atria, like to the left atria. There was like filling of the blood from the pulmonary circulation to the left atria, and to the right atria from the peripheral circulation. There was like filling with the blood. So the atria is like getting filled. Now a time comes that the atria, both the atria, they are loaded with blood. They are like totally loaded with blood. Okay, they are like full with the blood. Okay, so once they are full with the blood, they will exert a pressure. They will exert a pressure on this AV valve, and this AV valve on the either side, they will open. Without any contraction of the atria or contraction of the ventricle. No contraction will happen, just because the atria exerts pressure and forcefully opens the AV valves. Now, once this AV valves are forcefully opened, the blood from the atria. This blood from the atria, they come and they fill the ventricle. So ventricle was having a little bit of blood when it was relaxing. Now more blood comes to the ventricle from atria. Now since this filling has happened due to the pressure gradient, due to the difference in the pressure between the atria and the ventricle, this is a passive filling. This is first point. Another point to remember is that about 70 to 80%, that is 100 to 110 ml of blood gets filled from atria to ventricles by this passive filling. Okay, so this is what is happening in the rapid filling, and this one happens very fast. It lasts only for 0.1 second. And remember one thing, as I mentioned here, the AV valves open. Point to remember in normal physiological condition, in normal healthy person, opening of valves make no noise. When the valves are opening, there are no audible noise in case of a normal healthy person. Okay, this is an important point to remember. So gone with the rapid filling phase, that is the systolic phase, diastolic phase. Now next is this was the third, so this is like the D. Next is the diastasis or slow filling phase. This diastasis or the slow filling phase, it is about 0.2 seconds that we have already seen. Now here what happens, as the let me draw it here, it will be easy for us to understand. I'm just making a basic diagram so that we can understand the process. Okay, so here, as the ventricles are filled with blood because of the passive filling, obviously there is increase in the pressure. Here the pressure in the ventricles increases, right? The pressure in the ventricle increases, and still the AV valves are open. AV valves are open. They are not snapped yet. They are not closed yet, right? They are open. So there is very, very slow passage of blood from the atria to the ventricle, because most of the blood that was present in the atria has come to the ventricle. Now atria also has less volume of blood, so now the healing rate of ventricles, the filling rate of ventricle slows down. It slows down, but the slow process stays for about 0.2 second. Now, this is also a passive process, right? This is also passive process. Okay. So both the rapid filling and the slow filling are the passive process. Okay. Now comes the last filling stage. Comes the last filling stage or last rapid filling stage. Now here what happens? Here it is about 0.1 second. Now let us again draw for our understanding. So here this is the atria and these are the ventricles. So what scenario was there? What did we see? What did we see? Okay, I have to use a different color for the valves now. So the valves were open, right? And there was passage of the blood. And now by the slow and the rapid process, there is about 100 to 110 ml of blood in the ventricles, right? And earlier, before the feeding started, they were about 30 ml. And after all this, now there is about 100 to 110 ml. But to the atria, there is still blood coming very slowly from the peripheral circulation as well as pulmonary circulation, that is through the vena cava on the right side and through the pulmonary veins through to the left side of the atrium. So now what happens when the pressure is like the pressure difference, the pressure has increased in the ventricle and the pressure difference has gone opposite. Like now the ventricle is having more pressure than the atrium. Here what happens? Here there is a atrial systole. Okay, atrial systole happens. Now by this about 20 to 30 ml of blood is pumped from atria to the ventricles. Okay, so earlier it was 110, say 110 ml. Now again another say 30 ml has been pumped. So now the total volume becomes 110 plus 30, which is about 140 ml. Now this is what now this say 110 ml plus 40 or 30, let's take the upper level, 40 ml is filled in the ventricles. Remember both ventricles. Okay, in the ventricles by passive and active process. So passive process, we understood what was the passive process, and this contraction of the atrium that additionally fills another 25 to 35 or 50 ml or 40 ml. It is called the active process. So this systole happen. Now this is an active healing stage because there is contraction of the atrium. Without contraction, this 25 to 40 ml or 35 ml won't come to the ventricle. That's why it is an active filling process. So by this active and passive filling process, a total of 140 to 150 ml, in some cases it can be 130 also, of blood is filled in the ventricles. So you see this filling phase is a diastolic phase. By the passive and the active filling, there is a total of about 140 to 150 ml. It can also be 130 ml. Okay, chalo. So we are writing 130 ml. So this amount of the blood that is present in the ventricle after the ventricle is filled from the atrium by active and passive process, this is called as the end diastolic volume. End diastolic volume means the volume of the blood that is present at the end of the diastole, end of the relaxation. So if you remember that left out part in the pie chart which I told I would be telling you, so here you see this fast feeling and the slow feeling, which is the last feeling. These are actually making the passive filling of the ventricle. These are actually making the passive filling of the ventricle. Okay. Whereas the active filling is the atrial systole. So, atrial systole overlaps or is a stage which overlaps with the ventricular diastole, or we can say atrial systole, which is also the active filling of the ventricle, is a part or extended part of the ventricular systole. So, atrial systole comes within the ventricular diastole. Okay. And we know atrial systole, it happens only for a very small time. This atrial systole, it happens for a very small time, this which is only about 0.1 second. Okay, so these are the filling phase of the ventricle. Let me see the chat box if any. No, okay. No, okay. So, okay. These are the stages of the ventricular diastole. Now coming to the ventricular systole or the ejection phase. Ventricular systole. Diastole is over. Now we come to the systole. Okay, systole or the contraction of the ventricle. So overall, we start with the stages one by one. The first stage that happens is the isovolumetric contraction. Isovolumetric contraction. So what is isovolumetric contraction? Here, let's start with the stage when the rapid filling happened. That is the atrial systole happened. So when the atrial systole happened, what was the condition? What was the stage? Apical beat happened. It was like after the atrial systole, like after this atrial systole, during the atrial systole, the AV valves were open, right? And the contraction of the atrium happened. Now, after this systole, the ventricles are full with blood. Okay, the ventricles are filled with blood. Now, here what happens? The pressure in the ventricles are more than that of the aorta and pulmonary artery. Okay. So gradually the pressure increases. It becomes more than the aorta and the artery. And when this is happening, before that actually, in the meantime, what is happening? The increased pressure in the ventricles closes the AV valve. So this increased pressure in the ventricle, they kind of snap closes the AV valve. Otherwise, there would be there would be backflow of the blood from the ventricle to the atrium. So here the AV valve closes and first heart sound is heard. So closure of the AV valve gives out the first heart sound. Now, if you remember, when this filling phase was happening, what was the case? What was the scenario of the semilunar valves right from the protodiastole end stage itself, right from the protodiastolic end stage itself, the semilunar valves were closed. It was closed like on both the side, right? It was closed on the both the side. So now again you see the AV valves are closed. The semilunar valves were closed. The semilunar valves, they were closed from the protodiastolic phase only, right? So as a result of which, what is happening? As a result of it, as a result of it, the heart once again is a closed chamber. The heart once again is a closed chamber. The AV valves are closed. The semilunar valves are closed. Now, the heart here, the semilunar valves are also closed. So, the heart, that is the ventricles, obviously, the heart pressurizes. Okay, pressurizes means it contracts, it pushes for ejection as a closed chamber. As a closed chamber. So when this is happening, pressure of the left ventricle increases like more than 80 mmHg. Now 80 mmHg is the pressure that is maintained in the aorta. Aorta has a pressure of 80 mmHg. So as the pressure in the left ventricle is increasing, because now again as a closed chamber, there is like contraction happening, isovolumetric contraction. So the pressure in the left ventricle is increasing more than 80 mmHg, and pressure in the right ventricle becomes greater than 25 mmHg, and pressure in pulmonary artery is 25 mmHg. This is the information we have to remember. So you see, as the ventricle is like contracting, pressurizing, the pressure in the right ventricle and left ventricle is becoming more than the aorta and the artery. Now, this consumes a lot of energy in the form of ATP. And additionally, what happened? Okay, Shweta, Aisha, Aish. Hi to you all. And good morning also. So this consumes lots of energy, and as a result of which, what happens? The pressure in the ventricle increases. This forces the semilunar valves to open. They force the semilunar valve to open. Okay, this is like the last stage of the isovolumetric contraction. Now, when this happens, when this one happens, starts the next phase, which is the next phase, which is the rapid ejection phase. Now, rapid ejection phase, it lasts about 0.1 second, as we have seen in the pie chart. Apart from that, what is the characteristics of it? Here, 80% of the blood that has to be pumped out gets ejected via aorta. Means aorta to the peripheral circulation and to the lungs via the pulmonary artery. But here again and again, why we are talking about the aorta? Because it is connecting to the peripheral circulation. Okay. Okay. This is like the fastest process, and this happens only for 0.1 second. This is a rapid ejection phase. Next, what happens is the slow ejection phase. The slow ejection phase. Now, this slow ejection phase, it lasts little longer. It is about 0.15 second. It is about 0.15 second. After maximum blood is being pumped out to the periphery, here the blood in this stage gets pumped out at a slower pace. Now, this rapid phase and the slow phase makes the total of the ejection phase. It is the rapid ejection plus the slow ejection, which makes the stroke volume. Okay, it's make the stroke volume. So we can say stroke volume is the amount of blood ejected from the ventricles per beat. Means every time there is a contraction and relaxation per beat, the amount of the blood that is ejected out as very fast, rapidly, and then slowly. So both two combined together, the total volume of the blood that is being ejected out per beat every time the heart is contracting and relaxing, it is called stroke volume. Now, it is about 70 to 80 ml, and remember, it is independent of time. It is totally independent of time. It is not like 70 to 80 ml per minute, per second, per hour, nothing. It is only 70 to 80 ml per beat. Okay, this is the stroke volume. So the ventricular diastole got over, and in the ventricular diastole, there was atrial systole. Now the ventricular systole is also over. What remains in the cardiac cycle? Then the whole cycle, of course, I'm going to show you with the diagram also. So what remains is the atrial diastole. Okay, what remains is the atrial diastole. So 0.7 seconds of the cardiac cycle. So what happens in the atrial diastole? The only event that happens in the atrial diastole is the atrium gets filled with blood. So if we draw it, how will it stand out to be? It will be like this is the atrium, okay, and this is the ventricle, emphasizing more on the atrium. So here from the pulmonary circulation, here from the pulmonary circulation, oxygenated blood is entering. This is your left atrium, this is your right atrium. So here oxygenated or purified blood enters via pulmonary vein, the only vein in the body that carries oxygenated blood. Okay, so via this blood is entering to the left atrium. And what is the event that is happening in the right atrium? In the right atrium, there is impure or deoxygenated blood entering via the superior and inferior, via the vena cavas. These are the vessels through which deoxygenated blood enters. So, other yes, it is deoxygenated blood that enters. So, other than that apical beat or that quick systole, 0.7, most part of the cardiac cycle, the blood is entering like little by little, slowly, blood is always entering to the atrium. So, atrium is spending almost all of its time in the filling phase. Now, whatever we studied, like the cycle, just for a quick revision, let's see it in the diagram. So, all the stages have been drawn stage wise and shown to you. Just once more, see this one. Okay. See if it is visible. Okay. So it starts with the diastolic phase. So what is happening in the diastolic phase? If I enlarge this one, hope it's like showing up, the clarity is there. So what happens in the diastolic phase? Just see here once again very quickly. In the diastolic phase, there is like filling of the ventricles from the atrium. There is filling of the ventricle from the atrium. So this is the first one, is your protodiastole, where you can see the semilunar valves have closed. The semilunar valve have closed, and you can hear the second heart sound. This is the protodiastolic phase. Let me better write it. Protodiastolic phase. Now, second stage that you are seeing here is the diastolic phase, the diastolic proper. So in the diastolic proper, what do you see? In the diastolic proper, you see that there is passive filling. As I told you, there is passive filling of the blood from the atrium to the ventricle, the passive filling. The AV valves have opened. These are the AV valves. These are the AV valves, right? So they have opened up, and there is this passive filling of the blood, as we understood. This is the passive filling. Okay. After the passive filling happens in two phase speed, right? One is the fast and another one is the slow. So, fast and slow. Okay. After that, what happens? Next is the active filling, which is also the atrial systole. Atrial systole. So, here in the atrial systole, what happens? We can see there is additional filling of the ventricle from the atrium, but this has happened now because of the contraction of the atrium. See, it is shown in the diagram. It is due to the contraction of the atrium, and this is what? This is an active process. Right now, through this passive and active, the blood that we have in the chamber, it is the end diastolic volume. We have end diastolic volume is there in the ventricles. Okay. After the end diastolic volume, what happens? The pressure in the ventricle becomes more, as a result of which you see the AV valve closes, which is our first heart sound. Here we got the second heart sound. Okay. So first heart sound. So now again you see the ventricles, it's a closed chamber, the AV valves are closed, and here earlier itself the semilunar valves were closed. Now the ventricle starts pressurizing. Now starts contracting, isovolumetric contraction. Only the muscles contract, but there is no change in the volume. There is no change in the volume of the blood. So, there is isovolumetric contraction. So, this isovolumetric contraction, what it does, it causes increase in the ventricular pressure and it closes the AV valve. Earlier it has happened, still the contraction happens. As the contraction happens, the pressure in the ventricle becomes so high that the left ventricle pressure becomes more than the aorta and the right ventricle pressure becomes more than the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries the deoxygenated blood, right? Deoxygenated blood. So, the pressure in the ventricle, when it becomes more than the aorta and the pulmonary artery, here the semilunar valves open. Again, the semilunar valve open. And through this, there is rapid ejection. Through the aorta, it goes to the peripheral circulation, and through the pulmonary artery, it goes to the pulmonary circulation. So, here also first it is moving very fast, which we call the rapid ejection. Then it goes via slow ejection. So, totally rapid ejection plus slow ejection makes the stroke volume. So, these are the phases in the ventricular diastole and systole. Okay, this is our cardiac cycle. Okay, now you're understanding the cardiac cycle. Now let's, with a very clear head, very cool head, let us look at the Wiggers diagram. So what is this fancy naming diagram which we call as the Wiggers diagram? See here, this Wiggers diagram, this is a, let me write it over here first, it will be easy to remember and understand. Wiggers diagram. Wiggers diagram. Okay. Now, Wiggers diagram, it is the graphical representation of the pressure changes that is happening in the cardiac cycle. Now, pressure changes of what? Pressure changes of more than one substance. Okay, like this pink color thing we are seeing, that this pink color graph. This is the pressure change in the left ventricle. Now here one thing I am telling you, Why we are concerned about studying the pressure change in the left ventricle? See, the event or the pressure change that is happening in the left ventricle, the same pattern, the same pressure change, the same event is also happening on the right ventricle as well. But the only thing is that the pressure difference, the increase and the decrease in the left ventricle pressure is much bigger than that of the right ventricle. So it is easy for us to understand the Wiggers diagram because they are bigger in size. Nothing else. The same pressure change happens on the right ventricle also, but the size is small because in right ventricle, the maximum pressure, the right ventricle, as we saw, the maximum pressure, see, during the ejection, the maximum pressure in the right ventricle, it happens only up to 25 mmHg because the pressure that is in the pulmonary artery is 25 mmHg. So once the right ventricular pressure becomes more than 25 mmHg, it is enough for the ejection. It is enough for blood to go from right ventricle to the lungs. But in the left ventricle, the pressure has to rise all the way to 80 and more, because in normal condition, the pressure that is existing in the aorta is 80 mmHg. Okay, so for the ejection, means from the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood that is coming out of the aorta, it needs a pressure which is more than 80 mmHg. So obviously the size of the graph will be bigger. Therefore, it is easy for us to study the graph on the left side because the size will be big. Only for that reason, nothing else. Okay. So this pink one, it is a pressure change in the left ventricle. Okay. Here, the dotted lines on the top that you were seeing, the ejection is written and then you see the dotted lines. So this dotted lines, these are the pressure change in aorta. Okay, highlight it, it will be easy for you. Pressure change in the aorta and pressure change in the left ventricle. Okay, acha. These are the pressure changes there. Okay. Now see here the color. So here the dotted line that is below, like from the 0, you see another dotted line. This dotted line, this is actually pressure. I hope it's visible. Pressure change in the atrium. The atria. Okay, the atria. This is a pressure change in the atria. And then this dark blue line that you were seeing, the dark blue line that is down, this is the pressure, not pressure, it is the volume actually. It is the volume change in left ventricle again. Volume change in the left ventricle. And last, obviously you can see PQRST. PQRST, everybody knows this is nothing but the ECG, right? And those red line with the heart sound you were seeing, this is the, or these are the heart sounds. Okay. Now we'll discuss when we hear also this heart sound. So hope this is clear. Again, this darker purple thing is the change in the left ventricle. So we'll start with understanding the pressure change in the left ventricle. Okay. So, so here you see, since yesterday we have been telling one thing, that what is the thing? The thing is that electrical event precedes mechanical event. Means first is the action potential first, then contraction and relaxation of cardiac muscles. Okay, this happens. So, see here, first, this is the P wave, right? As you see here, this is the hump of the P wave. So, actually, after the P wave, here the hump, that pink hump you are seeing, this is the contraction. This is the atrial contraction. So you see, P wave has happened first. So if you draw the line all the way up, it is like almost after the termination of the P wave that the atrial contraction has happened. Okay, electrical event leading to mechanical event. Atrial contraction done. Now, after atrial contraction, see, then again there is this PR, like PR interval, and this is like the P wave plus a PR segment. So PR interval. After the PR interval, and when the electric impulse has gone to the AV node, then it started contracting the ventricles. So here you see the upward stroke, that you see, it is the ventricular, beginning of the ventricular contraction. So if you draw this line, you will see it is almost at the end part of the R wave. This is the R wave. So almost this contraction of the ventricle, it starts at the end of the R wave, and this contractile stage, this contraction followed with the relaxation, like beginning of the relaxation. This is the relaxation phase. It stays and remains almost, till the end of the T wave. So from here, what are the points that we can write? One by one, we will write the points that as we go on understanding. Okay, so the point to be noted is that ventricular, this is important, contraction starts almost at the end of R wave and last till the till the end of T wave, almost at the end of T wave. Okay, now coming to the events. So here you see when the contraction of the ventricle starts, the pressure in the ventricle is almost zero. It is almost zero. What? The pressure in the ventricle, left ventricle we are talking about. Why it is zero? Because when the ventricle started contracting, just before the contractile phase, the pressure is minimal. So from zero, as the contraction, this is the isovolumetric contraction. As we go upwards, it is the isovolumetric contraction. This is isovolumetric contraction. Here you see this blue one, it is your volume change in the ventricle. So here you see there is no change in the volume, only the pressure is increasing. When the ventricles are contracting from zero pressure, it is riding all the way till 80 mmHg. Now, once it reaches 80 mmHg, here you see the dotted line. This is the aorta, pressure of the aorta pressure. So, here you see, once it reaches 80, still the contraction happens, and as the contraction continues, the pressure in the left ventricle exceeds, it becomes more than 80 and it reaches to maximum of 120. As soon as it reaches to a maximum of 120, here immediately the event that happens is the opening of semilunar valves, or here it is only the aortic valve. Once the semilunar valve is opened, what follows next is the rapid ejection phase. Rapid ejection phase. So this phase, the peak most, it is the rapid ejection phase. As soon as the rapid ejection phase is over, that means lot of blood has gone out of the ventricle in the rapid ejection phase. So automatically, again you look here, the pressure in the ventricle, it starts falling. The pressure in the ventricle, it starts to fall. Now from 120 max, it goes to 100, 90. That moment it touches 80, that is the pressure in the aorta. The pressure in the aorta, immediately this is the stage when the, let's write only the aortic valve because we are talking here about the left lung. Here the aortic valve closes. Okay, the aortic valve closes. Now again, here you see, after this happens, I'm rubbing it off because we have to understand the change in the aortic pressure also. So once this happens, this is followed by further decrease in the pressure in the left ventricle. The slow ejection is happening. This is the slow ejection phase. So the slow ejection is happening and there is still pumping of the blood via the aorta in a very, very small quantity, and the pressure in the ventricle decreases. Now this decrease in the pressure in the ventricle is called as the isovolumetric relaxation. It is called the isovolumetric relaxation. Now, once the isovolumetric relaxation happens and the pressure in the ventricle drops to minimal, then again, once again, the relaxation, the proper diastolic phase happens, which is designated as this isoelectric line. Now, again, if we go for a quick revision, what did we see? First, the P, the depolarization of atrium has happened. This depolarization of atrium causes the systole of the atrium. Now, systole of the atrium means what? It is the last phase of the ventricular diastole. The ventricles are now filled with blood, and the all the four chambers, like all the four valves are closed, and the ventricle is a closed chamber. What next starts is the isovolumetric contraction. When the isovolumetric contraction happens, there is gradual increase in the pressure in the ventricle. So as long as the pressure increases to less than 80 mmHg, the aortic valve remain closed. The moment the pressure in the ventricle becomes more than that of the aortic pressure, there is opening of the semilunar valve. Now this opening of the semilunar valve is followed by which phase? This opening of the semilunar valve, it is followed by the ejection phase, which is the rapid ejection, and the semilunar valves are closed. Now, at this condition, the semilunar valve still remains closed. So, the blood is now ejected out at a slow phase, which is the slow ejection. So, this phase, the rapid phase plus the slow phase, together makes up the stroke volume. Now, as soon as this aortic pressure in the aortic valve, it touches 80, once again there is closure of the semilunar valve. So, when there is closure of the semilunar valve, if we draw the line, here you see, if we, this notch, when the semilunar valve closed, see here, this is the time which coincides with the second heart sound. Just like at the beginning of the contraction, when the AV valve snapped or the AV valve closed, there was the first heart sound. These are the two audible sound that we hear in a normal healthy person. So once the semilunar valve is closed, so here the semilunar valve is closed, here the aortic valve is closed. Now the ventricle is relaxing. Now the ventricle is relaxing, and this is the isovolumetric relaxation, in which there is no change in the volume, only the pressure from 80 is again falling down to 100. Once the volume becomes almost zero, again the AV valves open. At this stage, this is the stage where there is opening of the AV valves, and AV valves opening or semilunar valve opening, it makes no sound. Then follows the passive feeling. This is the passive feeling of the ventricle. Okay. Now going by the volume change in the ventricle of the events we have studied. See here. After this atrial systole, see the volume in the ventricle is increased. Why the volume in the ventricle is increased? Because blood from the atrium has come to the ventricle. Okay. Very easily. From the ventricle it has come, from the atrium it has come to the ventricle. So the ventricular volume is more. Then start the ejection. Rapid ejection, slow ejection. Ejection means what? The blood is leaving the ventricle. The blood is leaving the ventricle. So here you see, as the blood is leaving the ventricle, getting out of the ventricle, here you see drop in the ventricular pressure, volume. There is drop in the ventricular volume. Okay, ejection phase. Again, passive feeling, passive feeling. Passive feeling, again you see the ventricle is receiving blood, passive feeling, and this hump is the active feeling. So together there is so much increase in the volume of the ventricle. This is the end diastolic volume. This one is the end diastolic volume, which is shown as 130 ml here. Okay, so the pressure change in the ventricle is done. Volume change in the ventricle is done. Now coming to the change in the aortic pressure. Very simple. Aorta, even when it is in relaxed condition, then also it is the pressure in the aorta, it is never coming below 80 mmHg. Aorta maintains a pressure of 80 mmHg. Always remember, important point to remember. Why it maintains? Because even after ejection, there is a certain column of blood. There is always a certain column of blood that is present in the aorta. Now, that certain column of blood, it is always like, aorta, it's a blood vessel. It has got smooth muscle. So, the smooth muscle in the aorta always squeezes that little bit of blood. And that is the reason why the blood pressure from the pressure in the aorta and from the aorta never becomes less than 8. Okay. Now, as long as the pressure 80 mmHg is maintained in the aorta, that time the pulmonary valves are closed, right? The pulmonary valves are closed, the semilunar valves and the aortic valves, these are all closed. Now, once there is contraction, isovolumetric contraction in the ventricle and ventricle pressure becomes more, we know that the aortic valve opens. So, see the dotted lines here. See the dotted lines here. Here, after the change in the ventricle, like the ventricular pressure has touched 80 mmHg, when the ventricular pressure is increasing, see the pressure in the aorta is also increasing. Like pressure in the ventricle touches maximum 180, the pressure in the aorta also touches maximum 120 during the rapid ejection. Okay, say here maximum ventricular pressure in the left is 120 or 30, whatever. Same pressure will be followed by the aorta also. Whatever maximum pressure ventricle reaches, aorta also will touch that maximum pressure. And then when there is like rapid ejection and slow ejection, the pressure in the ventricle drops. See, the pressure in the aorta also drops. But when the pressure in the aorta drops and it again touches 80 mmHg, From 80 mm Hg, this pressure in the in the aorta will not come to 70 or 60 or 50 in normal physiological condition. In a normal healthy person, as soon as the pressure in the aorta touches 80, it will again close its gate. Again, it will snap the aortic valve. Okay, it opened. So 2 points to remember. Aortic valve, this aortic valve opens when the left ventricle pressure is greater than 80 mm Hg, okay, and closes when the aortic pressure again decreases to 80 mm Hg. This is kind like a small point that we have to remember. Okay, it decreases to 80 and then again this aortic valve closes and it maintains the pressure. It maintains, see here, it maintains the pressure at 80, like 70 to 80 mmHg. It never goes below that until the next cycle starts. Okay, this is how the aortic pressure is maintained. Now coming to the heartbeat, the first heartbeat is due to the closure of the AV valve. Second is due to the closure of the semilunar valve, and those are audible in a normal healthy person. Now what about the third heart sound? So here you see the third heart sound. If you look, what is the cause of it? The third heart sound is due to the filling phase, due to the passive filling. So another point to remember in context to the heart sound, first and second are audible and healthy. It means the person is healthy. Okay. Now, third heart sound. Third heart sound is audible in young children, that too maybe not 100%, not in all, and athletes. Okay. Otherwise, in pathological conditions. Okay. Because when the ventricles are getting filled with the blood, there is certain vibration which can be heard. So it also can be heard in young adults or children or also in athletes, but it becomes very prominent in pathological conditions. Coming to the fourth heart sound. So here you see the fourth heart sound is not shown, but actually fourth heart sound, it is like not audible, but during the there is a heart sound 4. Okay, it is inaudible and it is caused by the atrial systole. One thing about this fourth heart sound is that it is audible only during pathological conditions. Otherwise, it is not at all audible. Now coming to the ECG, once more, P causes the contraction of the atrium. Okay. The depolarization, that is the QRS, it causes the contraction of the ventricle, and contraction of the ventricle, go by the lines. You see, it starts almost when the R is over and continues all the way till the T is over, almost all the way till the T is over. T signifies the repolarization. After T, the isoelectric line we see here, this is actually which is the diastole proper, that is the filling phase. And once again, the next cardiac cycle starts with the hump that causes the atrial systole. So this is our Wiggers diagram. If you go point by point, stage by stage, it will be easy for you to revise also. Now coming to this change in the atrial pressure. So since we have written too much in it, understanding the atrial pressure, we will use another diagram. So initially it may sound little bit difficult, but just study point wise as explained to you, it will not be difficult at all. So atrial pressure change. Okay, atrial pressure change. The atrial waves are this. So this is the pressure of the atria or atrial pressure change. Okay, now the waves that we get in the atrial pressure change, these are the A, C, X. X is a descent actually, means a slope kind of a thing. B and Y. Now what causes this waves? As you can see, this wave, which is A, the A wave. Okay, the A wave. This A wave, it is caused by the atrial contraction. It is caused by the atrial contraction. Now, you can see here, this A wave is the one which coincides with the PQ interval. Here you say it coincides with the PQ interval. The A wave, that is the contraction of the atrium. What causes the C wave? C wave, it is caused by the ventricular contraction. Okay, ventricular contraction. What causes the X descent? Now, X descent, it is caused by the ventricular ejection. Okay, and it is a vacuum effect. We'll come to that. And this V wave, it is caused by the filling of atria, and Y by the caused due to passive filling of ventricles. Okay, so when there is contraction of the atrium, this contraction of the atrium, it causes certain increase in the pressure of the atrium. See, there is like a hump. There is increase in the pressure of the atrium, which we get as the A wave. Okay. Now in C wave, what did we study? C wave is nothing but it is the contraction of the ventricles, right? You see that hump, you see that C wave, the C wave, the hump, it is a contraction of the ventricle. So here actually, right here I am writing, what actually happens here is, in the C wave, during ventricular contraction, the AV, because the ventricle is contracting, the AV valve kind of bulges out. The AV valve bulges out and pushes on atria. So when it pushes on atria, then again there is slight change in the atrial pressure. That is what is causing the C wave. Okay. Now this X descent. X descent. So X descent, it is a like a free downfall, right? It is like a free downfall. What is causing this X descent? Now here what happens is, that it is called the vacuum effect. Why vacuum effect? Like ventricles pumps out blood which pulls the atria during ventricular relaxation, right? So the atria, when the ventricles have pumped out the blood, the volume of in the ventricles become less and it goes for the isovolumetric relaxation. So when ventricle is relaxing, as a suction, as a vacuum effect, it is pulling the atrial muscles also. So that pull on the atrial muscle, it causes drop in the pressure of the atrium in the atrium, which is the X descent. Okay. Now here comes the V descent. Okay. So the V wave. Now here you see the V wave is again a hump. Means there is an increase in the pressure. Why this happens? This happens due to increased pressure in atria during diastole. Okay, just before passing the blood from the atria passively to the ventricles are constantly getting filled with blood, right? So filling of the atria with the blood also causes increase in the pressure. This is what causes this V, like bulging out, that increase in the pressure, that peak, that bump. Okay. Then again, we have this Y descent. Again, it's like a fall. It's like a fall. What is this Y descent? Now, this Y descent, it is when emptying, like the blood of atrial blood to the ventricles. So when due the passive filling occurs of the ventricle from the atrium is losing its blood to the ventricle because it is passing its blood to the ventricle. So there is a drop in the pressure in the atrium. This is what causes this down again slope. So studying which phase it coincides is like, it's like this A coincides with the PQ interval, PQ segment rather, C with the R, which is a contraction, like from R is almost end of the R, the contraction of the ventricle starts that phase. Y, as you see, it is like, it coincides like just before the repolarization starts, that is the emptying, isovolumetric relaxation, it coincides with the isoelectric line. And then V, it happens when there is closing, when there is like opening, when there is like start of the filling of the atrium. followed by the opening of the AV valve. So AV valve happens, repolarization happens, and passive filling happens. See here, it coincides with the segment. And why coincides with the TP segment? Because this is the stage when the ventricles are getting filled with blood. So these are the various stages which is coinciding with the changes in the pressure in the atria. Now all this in clinical conditions, in clinical in clinical conditions like insufficiency of tricuspid valve or tricuspid stenosis, atrial fibrillation, the A the A B and the essence become abnormal. Okay, so this is our understanding the Wiggers diagram and the graphs in it, and also the changes in the atrial pressure with the stages in it. Next class we would be starting with the end diastolic volume, pressure volume loops, Wiggers diagram in abnormal clinical condition. All those understanding we will talk and discuss, and also we will start with the cardiac output. Hope this video is helpful to you. See you again next day. Thank you.